We can bring you some breaking news right now. Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe's first post-independence leader, has died at the age of 95. We've understanding that Robert Mugabe was in Singapore receiving treatment for ill health. He was there for some time. We understand that the former Zimbabwean dictator has travelled to and from Zimbabwe and South Africa to Singapore for treatment over past years, and that he has died there in the last 24 hours. We know that he was there last week seeking treatment for ill health and old age. He ruled Zimbabwe for 38 years until he was forced to resign in 2017.
Once hailed as an African liberation hero, Robert Mugabe will perhaps be best remembered as a tyrant who all but destroyed his country. Robert Gabriel Mugabe emerged as a leader of Rhodesia's ZANU liberation movement in the 1970s, after spending a decade in jail for plotting to overthrow Ian Smith's white minority regime. His desire for revolution prompted the British-backed government to mobilise its forces against the black majority.
Britain has the option, we have said. Either they opt for peace or they opt to abandon peace and move into a war situation.
Robert Mugabe got his way. The Lancaster House Agreement paved the way for independence, ending British rule in Africa.
I, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, do swear that I will well and truly serve Zimbabwe in the office of President, so help me God.
The Zimbabwean leader quickly signed a pact with his bitter political rival Joshua Nkomo, effectively creating a one-party state. Over the next 3 decades, Robert Mugabe waged a brutal campaign to crush his opponents. He initially turned his anger on the white minority, which culminated in the violent eviction of white farmers. But he also turned on his own people.
The current chaotic state of affairs in undesignated and crime-ridden areas could not be countenanced for much longer.
President Mugabe ordered the demolition of entire townships, forcing hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. However, as his popularity continued to falter, he resorted to political intimidation.
It just shows the extent to which this desperate regime is trying to protect its power.
Those policies destroyed Zimbabwe's agricultural sector, prompting economic collapse and social decay. Revelations of widespread vote rigging in 2008 forced Robert Mugabe to give in to international pressure and form a unity government with Morgan Tsvangirai's Movement for Democratic Change. The president and his second wife Grace, who had an infamously extravagant lifestyle, were reviled both at home and abroad. Yet despite their reputations, they were still received by the Pope. Towards the end of his life, Robert Mugabe maintained that his grip on power had not weakened. But Mugabe was wrong. His 37-year reign finally came to an end following the sacking of his vice president and long-term ally, Emmerson Mnangagwa. Rumours abounded that the tyrant would appoint his wife Grace, 41 years his junior, as a replacement. For party officials, the possibility of Grace Mugabe as Zimbabwe's president-in-waiting was a bridge too far.
The chief of the Zimbabwe Defence Force.
Days later, the nation's army seized control of government and local television stations. The increasingly isolated Mugabe was placed under house arrest. His own party gave Mugabe an ultimatum: retire or face impeachment. Eventually, Africa's longest-serving ruler agreed to stand aside. A decision met with jubilation on the streets of Harare. His former deputy, Mr. Mnangagwa, was installed as his successor under an agreement that granted Mugabe exemption from prosecution. In his final days, Mugabe was rarely seen outside the gated walls of his lavish mansion. But beyond these opulent grounds, the scars of his authoritarian rule will remain visible across his impoverished nation for years to come.
Our breaking news of the past few minutes that Zimbabwe's former leader Robert Mugabe has died. He was aged 95. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has tweeted confirming the death. He wrote, "It is with the utmost sadness that I announce the passing on of Zimbabwe's founding father and former President, Commander Robert Mugabe. He was an icon of liberation, a Pan-Africanist who dedicated his life to the emancipation and empowerment of his people. His contribution to the history of our nation and continent will never be forgotten. May his soul rest in eternal peace." There will be quite a bit of reaction to this story. Many of it won't agree with what the current president has just said about Robert Mugabe, and we will be seeking to bring it to you this afternoon.